Sniper trap. In this tactic, the sniper intentionally shoots to wound rather than kill an enemy combatant. The aim is to lure more enemy units into the field of fire, allowing the sniper to engage them as they provide aid. This technique, known as aid salvo, is designed to surprise the enemy and defeat him quickly to avoid retaliation. It involves firing the first shot with all cannons at the same time, making it particularly effective in naval warfare, as multiple splashes are more visible than a single one. This technique was primarily used during World War I and World War II, especially since cruise missiles are now more commonly employed. Hull down position. The hull down position requires a tank to position itself on the back slope of a hill or utilize cover to expose as little of its body as possible. This strategy allows only the barrel to be visible to the enemy. While still practiced today, this technique has its drawbacks. It is not suitable for every type of terrain, especially flat terrains. Tanks require sufficient negative elevation and must remain stationary to avoid exposure. If a tank wishes to transition from defense to attack, it would find itself at a disadvantage, as it would be looking upwards and exposing its vulnerable underside. Creeping barrage. This technique involves a gradual advance of artillery fire to provide cover for infantry moving forward toward enemy trenches. It is often more effective than using artillery directly on trenches, as they are typically more resistant to direct hits. Defenders can be easily replaced, and barbed wire often remains unharmed. However, this tactic is quite dangerous, as it requires coordination between infantry and artillery to avoid friendly fire. Blitzkrieg. This tactic, famously employed by the Germans during World War II, involves a rapid and overwhelming concentration of forces in an arrow-like formation, combining mechanized and motorized infantry along with armored units. The goal is not to attack the front line directly, but to break through it. Artillery and close air support complement this tactic. One significant advantage is that it disrupts the enemy by continuously changing front lines. Foxholes. Foxholes are shallow dugouts where two infantry soldiers can position themselves to provide cover when enemies approach. Thanks to camouflage, the openings are well concealed. This technique was originally developed to counter Blitzkrieg tactics. Variations exist. For instance, the Germans had turreted foxholes, while the Japanese adapted theirs for better concealment, allowing only one infantry unit inside for effective ambushes. Recon by fire. This tactic involves firing on suspected enemy positions to provoke a reaction, helping to confirm their presence or absence. Single envelopment. In a single envelopment, one decoy division attacks the front, while another flanks the enemy's rear, preventing reinforcements from arriving or neutralizing them. Pincer movement. When the enemy launches a frontal assault, central units remain in place while two flanking units move outwards to attack the enemy's sides, forcing them to fight on two fronts and encircling them. Oblique Order. This is another flanking tactic where one segment of the army focuses on one side while the other gradually moves in an oblique direction to breach the enemy line by concentrating force. Feigned Retreat. This tactic involves pretending to retreat to lure the enemy into a vulnerable position, often devolving into a real retreat due to the loss of discipline among troops. Inverted Wedge. In this tactic, the weak center of the formation slowly retreats under enemy pressure while the wings advance forward, aiming to encircle the enemy. Crossing the T. In this naval tactic, a line of warships crosses in front of an enemy fleet, allowing each horizontal ship to fire at the vertical ships with all their guns, while the vertical ships can only attack with their front batteries. Bounding Overwatch. This is a movement tactic that allows units to advance while under fire. It divides a team into two groups. One provides overwatch while the other maneuvers. When the moving unit reaches its destination, it halts and provides suppressive fire, allowing the other group to proceed, and this process continues alternately. Ambush. An ambush is a surprise attack conducted by hidden units that await favorable conditions to engage. Skirmishers are troops deployed in front of the main force, spreading out to harass the enemy through small, intermittent engagements that delay their movement, disrupt their attack, or lower their morale. Trench raiding. Primarily used during World War I, trench raiding involves small-scale nighttime surprise attacks on enemy trenches. Raiders would stealthily approach sentries guarding sections of the trenches, eliminate them quietly, and toss grenades into enemy dugouts. This tactic was also employed to capture or disable high-value equipment and gather intelligence. To avoid friendly fire when returning, raiders typically used a password system for identification. Swarming. This tactic involves overwhelming a main target's defenses by launching simultaneous attacks with multiple independent units. It is predominantly used in asymmetric warfare, where one side is significantly outnumbered, and it confuses the enemy enemy through irregular assaults from various positions. Flying Wedge. The Flying Wedge is a formation of units advancing in a triangular shape. While more commonly used in ancient combat, it is still applied today due to the excellent situational awareness and visibility it provides. Police riot squads also frequently utilize this tactic. Defeat in detail. This strategy is most effective against a more numerous enemy. It involves dividing your forces into smaller groups, prompting the enemy to do the same, allowing for a larger portion of your forces to engage small enemy units in sequence rather than fighting against the enemy's entire strength at once. Air interdiction. This involves bombing strategic targets that do not pose an immediate threat but can influence the course of the war. A distinction exists between tactical air interdiction, which aims for immediate impact, like bombing supply routes to the battle area, and strategic air interdiction, which focuses on long-term advantages, generally targeting infrastructure like bridges and roads. This differs from strategic bombing, which is not related to ground operations. Siege involves surrounding an enemy city or fortress to block its supply routes and escape routes, aiming to force the enemy to surrender due to low supplies or to prepare for an organized assault. When soldiers construct a line of fortifications around a besieged city, it is called a contravallation. If they build a second line of fortifications facing away from the enemy's fortress to protect against potential relief forces, it is termed a circumvallation. Mouseholing. Mouseholing is a risky tactic for infantry, as it may not provide sufficient cover. Soldiers may blast through walls to access adjacent rooms or buildings. Air assault. This tactic uses aircraft such as helicopters to transport infantry behind enemy lines to mount an attack from the rear. It serves as a modern vertical adaptation of traditional flanking tactics. Tank Desant. Tank Desant involves infantry units riding on top of tanks and dismounting to engage in ground combat only during the final phase of an assault. Tanks are not merely used for transport. They also protect against anti-tank weapons. Shoot and scoot. This artillery tactic involves firing at a target and then immediately relocating from the firing position to avoid counterattacks. Marching fire. In this form of suppressive fire, walking infantry units continue to fire to compel the enemy to take cover, often with the ultimate goal of closing in for close combat. Center peel. Center peel is a modern infantry retreat technique employed when small groups need to disengage from a larger enemy force. It is somewhat similar to the bounding Overwatch tactic. Defense in depth. This strategy aims to delay rather than entirely prevent the attacker's advance. It relies on the tendency of an attack to lose momentum over time, covering a wider area. Once the attacker is spread thin, defenders can counterattack against isolated enemy units. Scorched Earth. The Scorched Earth tactic involves retreating while destroying anything the enemy could exploit, such as food supplies and transportation routes. This method was famously used by Russia against Germany during World War II, leveraging the vastness of Russian territory and the extreme winter conditions.
I don't think you'll be able to click on the next video until time runs out. 3, 2, 1, you're lost.